in the book of John that I found out that his audience was really the Pauline churches. He was really after securing them in the message of Jesus Christ, because these were the churches that Paul had set up. The Pauline churches were primarily in the grace of God. And Paul spent a lot of time talking about grace and the favor of God, and God had favored the Gentiles, and that he was pulling the Jews and the Gentiles in together. So John wrote his gospel because as a personal eyewitness, he wanted to solidify them in the identity, in the purpose, and in the message of Jesus Christ. Here we begin in chapters 13 through 17. This is really called his private ministry. He spent the first 12 chapters of John dealing with his public ministry. And the last sign or miracle that I'll give you, the first and last signs. The first signs was that John mentions was the turning water into wine in John chapter 2, that he went in the feast in Cana. And the last miracle he mentions in John chapter 11 was when he raises Lazarus from the dead. So in those miracles, John calls signs. At the end of the book, he says many other things that Jesus did which were not written, that if they were contained, the world could not hold them. His point was that I'm not trying to give you a narrative that would be inclusive of everything that Jesus did, but I want to show you some things so that, and catch this because here's his message, that you might believe. And here's the real message, that you might believe what you don't see, but yet you believe. And so John's message was to take the emphasis off of you proving your evidence by sight, but you proving your evidence by what you listen to in the Spirit. Well, let's see. A lesson in hypocrisy. Because he brings out, knowing already, see, here's the issue. Judas had already conspired to betray him before the supper. Now I don't have time to go to all these verses, but jot down Psalm 41 and verse 9. Because David points out there prophetically how he was wounded in the house of his friend. And how sometimes you think those around you are for you, and they already had plotted before they came to celebrate you. And you got to commune them knowing that they're already, well, let me not get ahead of let me talk about what Jesus knew. Number one, he knew his season. The text says in verse 1 that he knew. Now notice at this point, this is a very pivotal point in the story of Jesus in John's mind, because John is unfolding to us that Jesus came through an unfolding revelation of what his purpose was. See, we think that when God calls us, he reveals what he wants us to do in the very beginning. But what he does is he takes us step by step by step to where he really wants us to go. You might think, and I often tell people there's a difference between ministry and purpose. And we might think that just because we've been called into one thing, that that's really what God had us in mind to do. That is really not. Because Jesus was healing the sick, raising the dead, casting out demons. It would seem like this is a glorious ministry. Ministry can be very glorious. But that was not what he came to do. He was performing, he was doing that while he was waiting for the season of his purpose. But while he was waiting, he had to remain busy. So in verse 1 it says that he knew his hour. The NIV says he knew his season, or he knew his timing. The idea, the Greek word is Edo. And Edo means that he knew the appointed time. He knew it, and this is very important. He did not know it through foreknowledge. He did not know it because he was omniscient. He didn't know it as God because he was a man. He could not act as God because what he knows here, remember all these things are written for our example. So whatever he knew, we could know. So the Greek word here for what he knew was not foreknowledge. It was not divine of what he knew. It was perception and discernment, which meant that he knew something that he was not taught. He knew something that he did not get educated in. He knew something simply because it was intuitive in his spirit. It's like sometimes you just know that you know that you know that you know. You ever been there? You don't know how it got there. I can't tell you the formula. I can't tell you the ingredients. I just know. And when you speak prophetically, you just know what God has to say. Well, how do you know that? I can't tell you how I know. It is through discernment. So Jesus knows his season. He knows his season. Well, I've got to take you through the 4 stages of seasons in ministry so you can understand what's going on. And I'll do them in all peace so you can really understand. Well, let me take you through. Yeah. First of all, there's a season of preparation. You have to know when God is preparing you. Because in the season of preparation, it always demands that you wait. Preparation always means sitting. Don't do nothing. Just absorb everything. So when you're getting prepared, you are not doing anything. You're just absorbing. You're like a sponge. So you have to go through, you have to know when you're in a season of preparation, when you're just sponging things in. And so some people mess up because they don't know how to get that sponge ministry in their life. You ain't going to have nothing to say later if you don't sponge something in now. You got to learn how to absorb some things. Sometimes you got to sit and just be quiet. You don't need to say nothing. But I've been called in the ministry. That's all right. Just listen. Observe. Make observation. Take notes. You're in the season of preparation. But I can do that. You might be able to perform better than me, but this is not your season of performance. This is your season of preparation. It ain't got nothing to do how well you prepare a message. It's how long you've been walking with Jesus. I'm not talking about how long you've been in the world, how long you've been out there, but how long, that's why the Bible said if you're going to get the office of bishop, you cannot be a novice. It's about how long you've been walking with Jesus. If you just started your walk, you're not ready for the glory. After the preparation, the next season is performance. Because what you prepare, you must then extract out. And your performance for you becomes ministry. And here's where we messed up, because many of us think that ministry is purpose. Because we think that because we perform, because we're singing, because we're shouting, because we're dancing, because we're offering this, and because we're laying hands, because we're doing this, all we're doing is performance. You get weak doing performance. Jesus at one point walked around and said, I felt that virtue going out of me. Because when you get into real performance, for all that you've been absorbing in, it drains you. Yeah. Jesus' secret for being drained in ministry was always to retreat to the mountains and pray. Because he realized where his strength comes from. Amen. Some of us, our strength is to get around folks that love us and ask them, how do we do? We rather get the praise of men than to seek the mind of God. So we want our performance celebrated. And God wants your performance evaluated. While you're asking your friends, how did I do? God is wondering, did they glorify me? Or did they exalt you? You got to know when you get to the season. You know when you get to the right season of performance, Pastor Vinny, is because you don't really get your ego in the way. You don't care if folks don't like you. You don't care if they don't receive you, as long as you know you're doing what God said. So Paul says to Timothy, when you're with me right now, and I want you to make a declaration to the Lord that you know that he can do it. He can do it. I know. Tell the devil, I know. I know. I know.